Hello and welcome to the Working Tools Masonic Podcast, where today we will be interviewing Illustrious Brother Robert Whitmore, Supreme Grand Commander of the Ancient Accepted Scottish Rite of Canada.
Ladies and gentlemen, brethren all, welcome to the Working Tools Podcast, a casual conversation around Freemasonry. First, it's important to note that our opinions and thoughts are our own and do not reflect those of our Grand Lodge or respective craft or concordant bodies. Please connect with us and ask questions, either here on YouTube or on our Facebook page. We'd also appreciate a thumbs up and especially any comments on our videos.
Today on the Working Tools Podcast, we will be interviewing what we would know in the Blue Lodge as Right Worshipful Brother Robert Whitmore, but for purposes of our discussion today, since we're talking about Scottish Rite in Canada, the proper title will be Illustrious Brother Robert Whitmore, who is the Supreme Grand Commander of Ancient Accepted Scottish Rite of Canada and a Mason in Ontario. Illustrious Sir, welcome to our humble podcast.
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be with you.
So I guess my first question is, what's the history of your, how does one get to be Sovereign Grand Commander? What is your Masonic history, if you will?
Well, I guess you just don't say no quick enough.
Isn't that true?
But yes, well, to enter the Scottish Rite, of course, one has to travel through the craft lodges. And after completing the 3 degrees in our craft lodges here in Hamilton, I joined the Scottish Rite and gradually worked through. In Canada, we have 3 bodies of Scottish Rite: Lodge of Perfection, Sovereign Chapter Rose Croix, and the Consistory. And then worked my way, was selected to become an active member of our Supreme Council, and ultimately Lieutenant Grand Commander, and now Sovereign Grand Commander.
Interesting. So just to lay the foundation, since David, you're in Scottish Rite, right?
I am.
So since 2 of us are Southern jurisdiction Scottish Rite Masons, the parallel is that essentially Canada is the equivalent to the Southern jurisdiction or the Northern Masonic jurisdiction here in the US?
Well, in Canada, we only have one jurisdiction, and that is all of Canada. So we have our Supreme Council for Canada has very close relations with both the Northern and the Southern jurisdictions, but our one Supreme Council has authority throughout Scottish Rite in Canada. Our Scottish Rite in Canada is divided up into 45 different valleys. We have approximately 12,000 members in Scottish Rite Canada. Throughout Canada, we have our active members of Supreme Council. We have 33 active members of Supreme Council, plus any living past Sovereign Grand Commanders are considered as active members of Supreme Council. So essentially each province in Canada has what we call a deputy, being an active member of Supreme Council. Ontario, because of the large number of members in Ontario, we have 4 deputies in Ontario. And the Atlantic Canada has basically 2 deputies covering the 4 provinces there. So it's a little bit different, but essentially similar.
Between the deputies and active members, how many do you have?
Well, the deputies are counted as active members. So when we have when I say we have 33 active members of Supreme Council, that's 33 plus any living Sovereign Grand Commander continues as an active member. In Canada, an active member, other than a past Sovereign Grand Commander, upon attaining the age of 75, moves on to become known as what we would call past active, which means they would continue to attend our Supreme Council sessions, continue to be able to speak on any motions, but do not have a vote.
Interesting. So besides the age restriction, is it a lifetime appointment as well?
No. The Supreme Council offices, so my office as Sovereign Grand Commander has a term of 4 years.
Oh, wow.
And Lieutenant Grand Commander is 4 years. And the other Supreme Council officers are 4-year terms, but those offices may be extended, but Sovereign Grand Commander is 4-year term.
And so would it be possible that you might go from Sovereign Grand Commander back to a council seat, or would you?
Yes, you continue. You continue as an active member of Supreme Council. You're similar to a past master in a craft lodge.
And so when you become when you go there, how long is the journey from where you start in the chairs, if you will? Like, how many years does that take you?
Well, it's not the offices in our Supreme Council are not progressive offices. The only progressive office is a man would be selected or elected as Lieutenant Grand Commander. And would serve 4 years in that office and then progress into Sovereign Grand Commander. But the other offices within our Supreme Council are not progressive.
Oh.
So you may have an officer who holds the same office for several years. He can hold office until such time as he becomes 75 years of age if he wants to.
And so is it automatic progression from lieutenant to Grand Commander, or is it also a voted, or is it more like the Craft Lodge in that it's still a vote, but you just assume that you're going to take the seat unless something major happens?
That's pretty well it. Yeah. It's pretty well, it just happens.
That's very interesting. It sounds very similar to what little I know of the Southern jurisdiction, but it sounds except for the lifetime appointment. That's interesting that it's a term. Do you know, was it always a term limit situation, or did it change over the years? Do you know any of that?
As far as I know, and I've looked into it somewhat, upon age 75, an active member is required to go past active. Which 75 isn't what it used to be, maybe, and but it's been a long-standing part of our statutes and regulations.
Right. So how often does the Supreme Council meet each year?
Our Supreme Council has sessions once a year. In the past, up until a few years ago, we had a full annual session each year, and they would include all the active members, the past active members, as well as our honorary inspectors general. That session would be held in various locations throughout Canada. It would move around each year. And by the time you add in the honorary inspectors general, the actives, past actives, and then the candidates, because that was the function in which candidates would receive the honorary inspector general, the 33rd degree. So we would, and spouses are present, not for the degree, but they come to the session. So we would have roughly 400 to 500 people at sessions. Now, recently, with a couple of years ago, we altered the arrangement so that we only have a full annual session every other year. So in the even number years, we have a full session, and in the odd numbered years, we have only an executive annual session, which includes the active members and the past actives. And those executive annual sessions are done by conference call, virtually. Now, so we should have, by rights, had a full annual session this past September. But of course, because of the COVID, we could not proceed with that. So we just had an executive session by conference call.
Right. So Scottish Rite, like most of the other Masonic bodies, they has their its own teachings, but it also has its own focus on charities. And can you enlighten us about that within
Sure.
Canada?
In Canada, you're quite right. Charity is quite an important role in what we do. And we have the Scottish Rite Charitable Foundation of Canada, which was set up several years ago. And that charitable foundation receives donations and makes grants for the purposes of research into, we call it puzzles of the mind, research into things such as Alzheimer's and that type of problem. And those research grants go into the medical research into that field. So that's an important part of our Scottish Rite Charitable Foundation. And the other important part of the foundation is our Scottish Rite Learning Centers. And these, of course, I suppose we could say we modeled them to a large extent over the learning centers that are prevalent in the United States and your jurisdictions. The purpose of a learning center is to provide free one-on-one tutoring to children suffering from dyslexia. And currently in Canada, we have 9 learning centers in operation, plus there's one additional learning center, which is a satellite center, and that's in Ontario. So our learning centers we're quite proud of them, and they're quite successful. It's been challenging, to say the least, over the last several months as schools were shut down. Our learning centers, of course, had to be shut down. And in most of Canada, beginning in September, schools were gradually reopening, at least to a limited extent. And we approached our learning centers sort of on a one-to-one or one-by-one basis, and assured ourselves. We have an executive director who supervises all of the learning centers in Canada, received assurances that each learning center before it opened was putting the appropriate safeguards into place, and then would move forward in the reopening. There are a couple of learning centers that we were not able to open in the sense of having the children come in person because the facilities unfortunately weren't large enough to accommodate the proper physical distancing that we're all living with these days. So in those cases, those learning centers are providing the tutoring one-on-one, but virtually. So as I said, the learning centers are a success story. I know there's a success story in the United States, and they're a lot of work. They're a lot of money, But when I am able to attend the graduation celebrations for a learning center and see the success stories of the children who've completed the program, it certainly makes you proud and makes it all worthwhile.
Yeah, I imagine that the personal gratification of knowing the accomplishments of the program is to see it. It's got to feel so good. I'm glad we have that in our organization.
Yeah.
Now, maybe a different kind of question. Just why not? For our benefit of our listeners out there. Is the job of Sovereign Grand Commander very similar to that of a Worshipful Master, or what do you spend most of your time doing? Is it more running the Supreme Council, or is it more involved with the charities?
Well, the charities are an important part of it, but with respect to our Scottish Rite Charitable Foundation, it has a separate board of directors. It has a separate president, and so it is run independently of our Supreme Council, albeit the two work very closely together. Is Sovereign Grand Commander like being a Worshipful Master? Well, in some regards it is. In the sense that, for instance, when we do have a full session and we are conferring a 33rd degree on our candidates, the Sovereign Grand Commander presides of that degree in the same manner as a Worshipful Master would do in Craft Lodge. It's the same in the sense that the Sovereign Grand Commander I spend a lot of time with the administration of Supreme Council affairs and the various issues and questions and needs that come up from our various valleys and the bodies within the valleys. So that's quite a bit of time. But in addition to Sovereign Grand Commander, we have a Grand Secretary General who deals a lot with the administrative affairs. And we also have a Chief Operating Officer who is employed by our Supreme Council. And we're very happy, was just recently elevated to an active member of our Supreme Council as well. So, yes, Sovereign Grand Commander does a lot of things similar to what a Worshipful Master does, but he has a lot of help too. And I guess the one other aspect of being Sovereign Grand Commander is, in normal times, it involves traveling throughout Canada to our various valleys and attending meetings, doing official visits to each valley in Canada. I've just completed year 2 of my 4-year term. So I very much enjoyed the visits that I was able to do so far. Had a wonderful visit to British Columbia and visited several valleys within British Columbia. But again, those visits at the moment are suspended along with all of our in-person Scottish Rite activities.
So, some Grand Masters and so on, they have a theme for their year or a special project that they've undertaken or something in particular that they're going to strive to achieve during their term. Is there any such thing that going into the Sovereign Grand Commander's chair, or is it this is the stuff you need to take care of and you got to focus on that stuff?
Well, a bit of both. But what I have indicated and tried to stress is not anything that's new to anybody, but the challenge of engagement and enthusiasm, keeping our existing members engaged and enthused and participating. I'm quite convinced that 100 actively involved Masons is a lot better than 1,000 Masons who don't participate in any way. So engagement and enthusiasm, I think, are very important. And that's, probably even greater now that we're under this indefinite suspension. And how are we going to keep the enthusiasm alive, and how are we going to encourage our brethren to come back when the time is right? And I see that as a major challenge.
I agree. There's I think all the levels of Masonry are going to have that same challenge when things return to normal. So I hate to keep comparing the southern jurisdiction to Canada, but frankly, it's my frame of reference. It's what I know. So I know in the southern jurisdiction, a lot of valleys will do a weekend reunion, and we'll do all the degrees in one couple 3 days of activity. Is that common in Canada also, or is it more the way my valley does it? Is we do 1 or 2 degrees and spread them out over the course of a year? Is it which is more common, I guess, than Canada? Is it
Well, we have both. Some valleys, a body will might meet once a month and do a degree, and the candidates would progress through the various degrees, first through the Lodge of Perfection, then the Chapter Rose Croix, and then the consistory. And different valleys have different schedules so that it works out, and so those valleys, they don't do them all at once. Other valleys, my valley of Hamilton, we have what we call a fall reunion, a spring assembly. So the fall reunion, which usually takes place in November. The Lodge of Perfection will meet. We meet on a Monday night when we would do the 4th and 5th degree, and then they would meet all day Tuesday and include the other obligatory degrees of the Lodge of Perfection, and then in the evening of the Tuesday would receive the 14th degree. Then the Chapter Rose Croix typically would meet on the Wednesday and Thursday of that week, and then the consistory on the Friday and Saturday. So sometimes a candidate will choose to go right through all 3 bodies in the 1 week. But more often than not, they might do the Lodge of Perfection in the fall, and then wait and do the Chapter Rose Croix in the spring, and being part of the Easter ceremonies, and then doing the consistory perhaps the next fall. So, as I said, in some valleys, it's 1 degree at a time, 1 degree per meeting. Other valleys use the reunion format.
Yeah, I've heard the experience of some guys in the Valley of Vancouver doing it all in 1 weekend. And some of our guys here have gone there and gone through all the degrees in the 1 weekend, mostly because their work schedules took them out of town too much for them to be going through our degrees. Because I guess here in the Valley of Vernon, we really drag it out, because you go through Scottish Rite in the first year. In the second year, you go through the Rose Croix. And the third year, you can start into the consistory. But our consistory, it'll work out that it would take you 2 years to go through the consistory degrees. But one of the really unique things that we do is our adjacent valley in the Valley of Kamloops, they also are on that same program, but we will travel to their valley for the 13th degree, and they will travel to our valley for the 5th degree. And so we get some visiting, cross jurisdiction visiting happening, which is really cool.
Yes, that is very nice. I mean, spreading them out, like you've said, I think it has something to be said for it, in that it builds the habit of attending.
Yes. Well, there is that habit of attending, but one of the things that we found most interesting, because our valley likes to focus a little bit on education, is we've adopted the process of getting guys to do a bit of a report on the degree that they experience as they're progressing. And that's been very enlightening to see the different feedback and to see how much they actually retained, right?
Yes. Education is clearly an important aspect of Scottish Rite. We did a survey a few years ago of our membership, including what would you like to see, and education was front and center. Our brethren clearly want and enjoy education. There have been some wonderful education presentations made during this period of suspension through Zoom, and that's enabled, people from Ontario to come to the education program put on by the Valley of Vancouver through Zoom, which otherwise wouldn't be happening. So, but in my visits around the country, I try each time to meet with the officers and the leaders in the valley, and several valleys have adopted that very same program, where the candidates make a presentation or write a paper or do something with respect to the degree that they've just seen. So I think that's excellent.
Yeah, we've lightened their load, and we've asked them only, just a little paragraph, just something that stood out, which indicates to us how much they really retained, right? Because there was a lot of debate at one point of whether doing it our way and dragging it out so long, or going to the one weekend thing, which was more educational.
Yeah. Well, certainly in Hamilton, the people that try and go through all three bodies at one time in a week, it's a full week, and they come out of it with it's pretty much a blur, and so those brethren, more importantly than anybody, probably, you need to come back. You need to see it. Even you get your first degree, you have to go back and see one, because it's pretty confusing the first time you go through it. So I'm glad to hear that your valley is doing the educational programs. We're having actually on October 26th, we're having a countrywide educational program, which you'll be receiving notice of, with a presentation being made by David Freeman from British Columbia, and he's making a presentation. So we're doing that through Zoom. It's going to be presented twice in the evening of October 26th, 2 times to accommodate the various time changes throughout the country.
Steve, you have to make sure you send that link.
You'll be getting that, Steve.
We'll eavesdrop from the U.S.
Yes. Good.
Well, Lester, sir, we just have a few minutes left. Do you find in Canada that at least in the Southern jurisdiction and Scottish Rite in general, I think we call it the University of Masonry, or it's sometimes referred to as the University of Masonry. Do you find that Scottish Rite is able to give that education and teaching into the Blue Lodge? I think there's always, personally, I think there's a lacking connection between a real meaningful connection, not just Scottish Rite members that are also Blue Lodge members and happen to attend, and you look at somebody and go, oh, well, he's a Scottish Rite member. But do you find, or even hope, that maybe the Scottish Rite member would be maybe an educational leader in their lodge and developing educational programs and delivering educational programs and being that conduit in the Blue Lodge format, which I think would be a great marketing tool for Scottish Rite, because if you have your speakers that come in, generally are looked to as the leaders and looked to as the rock star, if you will, and people would generally gravitate to them after the meeting and want to know more about it. And of course, they can explain that they're a member of Scottish Rite, which may attract other members. Do you find that in Canada that Scottish Rite has that role at all?
Well, to some extent, but I think that's a role that we could improve. I think so much depends on valley by valley, craft lodge by craft lodge. You know, in my own particular craft lodge, when I joined, there were most of the involved members in the craft lodge also were involved members of Scottish Rite. And in that regard, encouraged new craft lodge members to continue on through Scottish Rite. In other craft lodges, that isn't so much the case. So, but it's an ideal to strive for, that's for sure.
Yeah, what caught my attention was the best ritualists seemed to be Scottish Rite members. And so it was like, okay, I was going to check that out because I take great pride in memory work and
Right.
whatnot. Now, Illustrious Grand Commander, now question for you, being that we're running down to the end of our time here. Is there any message that you want to get out to the general public or anybody who happens to see this episode of our podcast?
Well, I guess what I'd like to say is that of importance in Scottish Rite, just as in all of Freemasonry, especially in these difficult times, is the importance of benevolence and the fact that we all need to look out for each other. And when I say benevolence, I certainly include financial benevolence, because a lot of our brethren are facing hardship right now with loss of employment and so on. But benevolence is more than just financial aid. It's reaching out to friends, reaching out to family members, families of our deceased brethren. And we are really encouraging benevolence more than ever right now.
Amen.
Yep, we definitely need some of that, and I heartily echo what you said about Masonic education. These days, what we as a fraternity have suffered in a loss of fellowship, I think there's been a gain in Masonic education that can definitely be, I hope to see continued. And if anyone has the ability to see this podcast, they have the same ability to get a world of education out there. It's constantly being present in various places around the world.
Not only education, but when you think about it, the fellowship is really expanding as well. When you consider how many people are crossing borders now just by getting on their computer and getting onto a Zoom education.
Yeah.
Indeed. Well, with that, as has been said, we're running out of time. So I would like to thank you say a thank you to illustrious brother Robert Whitmore, the Supreme Grand Commander of Ancient Accepted Scottish Rite of Canada. And on behalf of Very Worshipful Brother David and Worshipful Brother Steve and myself, thank you this evening for coming out, sir.
Thank you very much for having me. I've enjoyed it very much.
And we
keep up the good work.
Oh, we try. And we look forward to putting out another episode soon of the Working Tools Masonic Podcast. Goodbye.
Goodbye.